Jimmy? Was that you?
Oh, and there he is. Profile picture.
Hey guys.
There he is. Uh-oh, we can't hear him.
Hmm. Now can you hear me?
Can't hear your audio yet.
Yep, not yet. It's not on our end. Did you see anything on our end? Does it?
How about now?
Does.
Hello.
At least on the monitors, it looks good. Does our volume sound good to you?
Yeah, sounds good to me.
That's cool. Yep.
Well, guys, we are back again with Jimmy Hinton, and I'm just going to take a few minutes. Many of you watching may not know who Jimmy Hinton is or how we met him. So I'm just going to take a few minutes to kind of give a little bit of history. We were involved with a non-institutional Churches of Christ from approximately 2021 until 2024. We stumbled upon Jimmy's website and ultimately read his book called The Devil Inside. And we did a podcast with Jimmy in I want to say May of 2024. It's been a couple years.
Mm-hmm.
And that podcast, which I'm going to link in the comments below, basically was us interviewing Jimmy about I'm going to call it a predator profiling tool that he used to help identify predators in the church settings. When we left the Church of Christ, we were initially gung-ho to help other church abuse survivors and SA survivors and all of that. And then we realized that we really had a deep level of trauma ourselves and ultimately wondered if we were even going to continue the podcast.
Yeah.
We had to step away
Yeah.
for about a year and just focus on healing. And we realized that every time we tell a bit of our story, it resonates with somebody. There's somebody out there that was like, wow, I needed to hear that. And that really was the motivation for us to keep going. And so, which brings me back to Jimmy.
And thanks for coming back. And I want to say just a little hoorah of, kudos to you for working it from the inside, with sticking with it. And I'm sure has not been easy. And the things that you see and the things that people throw at you and say, you're this, you're a heretic, Hunter, I can only imagine the insults and the things that are lobbed at you, but yet you're still here. You're still going after it. You're still, working behind the scenes, things that we don't even know about that are happening. Kudos for sure.
Yeah.
Kudos, man.
Thank you. Thank you to both of you. And yeah, you forgot to mention the death threats too. I've had plenty of those.
Oh, I can
And
imagine.
it's really bizarre. And uh yeah, I don't know. The more resistance I get, the more I just dig my heels in. And
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm not going anywhere. Um the
Amen.
threats don't bother me. They don't intimidate me. It only makes those people look like idiots. And I just it doesn't bother me. So it's a very interesting dynamic because you don't expect that in the church.
Yeah.
In the church, we expect people to behave, I guess, to behave well and like they're actually sane people. And when you're talking about the protection of children, it gets really, really bizarre really quickly. And as you guys experienced, you mentioned finding me on my website. My website actually about 6 or 8 months ago was hacked really
Oh,
badly
I
by a
wondered
hacker
about
in Indonesia. And I was current on everything. I had everything backed up. And I ended up barking it all the way up to the very top I was using Bluehost. And they said, we have never seen a hack like this before. And they were like, they literally like usually when they hack it, they'll steal a domain name, something like that, or they'll create one that's similar and drive traffic to that site. They actually
hmm.
came inside, got in my account. They deleted every single file that I have, including all the backups. Like they're gone. They can't be recovered. And they said unless you
Wow.
have hard copies of everything that you've ever written, it is gone. There's no way to get it back. I was like, ah, cool.
Wow.
So, it's
Wow.
one of those things, and I'm not going to start from scratch again. So it's just my book is out there, and that's going to have to be what it is.
So you
wow.
But
didn't you didn't have anything locally backed up. It was all there. It's all
it
gone.
was all of it. because I was like, well, it's I'm paying for a service and it's backed up. It's backed up on their servers.
Yeah.
So I had my website, I had everything there, and I was like, well, just in case something ever happens, it's good to back it up. So I paid to have it all backed up, all gone, all deleted. And so now it's
Whoa.
like some gambling site. So jimmyhinton.org. It's like,
Yeah.
go gamble.
Oh, didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. Well, I know we're on a little bit of a time crunch, but I just wanted, during the last couple years, and actually I would say for the year leading up to us leaving the Church of Christ, and I want to be clear for anybody watching, we're not picking on the Church of Christ at all. This topic we're talking about is in every church.
Yep.
We mentioned the Church
That was
of
just our
Christ.
background.
That was our background.
Yeah.
Um, we have heard people in the religious world all the time talk about preachers and pastors that struggle with sexual sin, whether it be a porn addiction, whether they've, maybe cheated on their wife. And I've had people come down on me and said, well, Vicky, should we just fire every pastor that has a porn addiction? And I'm like, absolutely not. And that's not what I'm talking about. What comes to my mind, and I'm going to let you comment on this, Jimmy, because you work as a preacher, is to me, it's pretty clear that a pastor that's struggling with personal sin is way different than somebody who's abusing children
Yeah,
and should be
I
dealt
agree.
with differently.
So this is a really interesting topic, and I don't really write about it publicly because, quite frankly, I'm kind of done with the advocacy community just at large, because it's more toxic than the church. The very church that they claim is so toxic, and they're just terrible at protecting children. The advocacy community is worse. That's been my experience. They're far worse, and within that toxic community, there's there's like this rabid putting the pastor on the pedestal, which is so bizarre to me because their whole thing is, well, the church is, you can't trust anybody, and like all the leadership is corrupt and this and that. But then they hold the leadership to a higher standard than anybody else in the world, and they're like, if they ever look at pornography, then they should be banned from ministry forever. And I'm like, how does that make sense? First of all, so I take a contrarian view, and I agree with you. I've always held a contrarian view, but like I said, it's not worth putting it out there because it's just the amount of criticism, rabid criticism that you get. It's wild. But I can think of two very good friends right now who are currently in ministry. They were formerly addicted to pornography.
Yeah.
There was no CSAM. This was all, adult material.
Yep.
And here's why I think that they should still be qualified for ministry. Number one, the very first person they told is their spouse.
Mm-hmm.
They literally risked everything.
Yeah.
And told their spouse. They confessed. They were completely and still are completely transparent. I was in a meeting with one of those friends, and he was talking very openly in front of his church leadership. So I know he wasn't putting on a show for me, because he was like, all of my leaders know I had an addiction. He pulled his phone out. He said, here's my phone. This is not my phone, because once I admitted to doing that, this stopped being my personal device. He said, this is a phone. It's a public phone. Everybody has access to it. I will put it on the table. He said, there's no lock code to it. He said, they can go through it anytime that they want. They can literally request my phone on demand, and I will relinquish it. He said, I'm not going to put up a fight. I have nothing to hide. And that's such a difference from what we experience with child abusers who they thrive on minimizing it, right? They minimize everything. And it's always pin the blame. It was the child's fault. The child came on to me, those sorts of things. And you're like, wait, what?
Yeah.
And then they give you lectures about forgiveness. And don't you know that we're all sinners and we're all saved by grace? Like, these are the things that you hear from abusers.
Mm-hmm.
And very rarely almost never do I hear that kind of talk come out of somebody who confesses to being addicted to pornography. I just don't hear it.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you pointed it out like that, because Vicky and I have had some private conversations and talking about these situations where someone's done something, but specifically with children, and that language that you said, where the one who's repentant is as transparent as they can be. They're not trying to get back into children's ministry. They're not trying to get around where there's access to kids. In fact, they actually are almost um, what's the word I'm looking for? They're like self-regulating. They're like, okay,
Yeah.
no, I don't want to be in children's ministry. Don't
Yes.
leave me in these positions. Don't do that. I'm not seeking leadership, or I'm not, whatever it is. And I'm not saying it is bad for the leadership, but you know what I mean? They're not trying to find those things. That's the repentant person. And the non is exactly what you said. They're diminishing. They're saying, oh no, it's not like this. Oh, what about forgiveness? Like the example Vicky gave of the man in our life that was, saying, hey, you should forgive.
Mhm.
There's the repentant person is very much on board with self-reflection and self-regulation and being held accountable. They recognize, I had a fault, I had a failure,
Yes.
I need help. Jump in with me. It's not their fault, it's my fault.
But they also are willing to share details, and I know it's just from working with people who've been addicted or are addicted to it. There's so much shame and humiliation that's associated with that, and you can see it, and it's so readily available, and
Yeah.
it's just a really bizarre thing, and I've not seen the same response from people that I see with child abusers. Child abusers are always they lie about what they did. It's always, 55 years ago, and it was one incident, and it was a misunderstanding, or I was drinking and I wasn't myself, and it's like they come up with all these ways to minimize it, and
Yeah.
they're never truthful. They're never truthful. And that's why I say,
Yeah.
like, those people don't belong around children. And the research shows, like, the secular people get it. The church people don't. But the secular research says they're always going to have, I'm talking about pedophiles, they're always going to have these thoughts of children. And so
Hmm.
even if you can physically keep them from having hands-on victims, which good luck with that, um, they're still thinking about the children that way. They're still watching children. And those are the thoughts that are going on in their heads as they're looking at them.
Hmm.
And they're always thinking about ways that they can manipulate people, manipulate adults, lie to them, use forgiveness as a weapon. And
Hmm.
it's just it's such a different category altogether. It really is. And they're producing victims. Let's not forget that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's giving life scars. I like how you said, secular world gets it, the church world doesn't.
Hmm.
Because I brought that
Thank
up in
you.
some, oh my gosh, it's so, and I brought that up in a few conversations I had with some of the men in the men's meetings, what's how Church of Christ does their structure, in case the audience doesn't know.
There's no
Yeah.
elders.
But yeah, we didn't have elders at that particular congregation at that particular time. So, but I had brought up I brought up a lot of the statistics that I think are covered in the previous video. And so I don't want to deal with all that here, but that whole idea of the pedophile not changing, and, the world gets it, the church world doesn't. And I'm like, this is very real. This is what happens. These people do this. Like, I'm laying out all this stuff. And I said, the secular world even gets it and puts in barriers. And the response I got was, I don't remember the words verbatim, but it was basically like, well, that's the secular world. It's like,
they're so worldly to want to protect children.
like, well, why are they doing a better job? I mean,
Yeah.
we should be the best at it. The church should.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
And
I
I mean, not to mention, like, you look at Jesus, he was a fierce defender of people, of innocent people, like
Yeah.
fierce. And, this whole idea, like, I've talked about this before. I don't remember if I talked about it on your podcast, but this whole idea, like, we embrace this all are welcome unless you disagree with the leadership. Like, that's the one exception to that. But all are welcome regardless of your past. We're the church, we're Christians, and we're supposed to embrace everybody in the name of Jesus. And I'm like, in what Bible In what Bible is there ever a theology that you're supposed to just embrace everybody? And I'm like, Jesus was so crystal clear on this in so many different examples. I mean, take Matthew 7. He's talking about the thorn bushes, and he's like, thorn bushes don't produce fruit. They can't. And he's like, they will be cut down and thrown into the fire, right? Same language, same exact verbatim language that John the Baptist used when he introduced Jesus. I always ask people, how did John the Baptist, how did he introduce Jesus? And everybody says, oh, behold the Lamb. I was like, that's not how he introduced Jesus. When he introduced Jesus, he said, behold the Lamb to Jesus when he saw Jesus coming at him. To the crowd, he said, you brood of vipers. That's literally his opening sentence, introducing Jesus, the Messiah. You brood of vipers, who warned you to flee from the coming wrath? And then he says, already the axe is laid to the root of the tree. Mm-hmm. Those who don't produce fruit will be cut down and thrown into the fire. And then he goes on. He's like, Jesus, right? He's going to come. He's going to separate the wheat from the chaff. The chaff is going to be burned up in this fire. John's talking about people, you know? And, and then the very next sentence, bear fruit in keeping with your repentance. In other words, if you're not bearing good fruit, you are distinguished between a fruit-bearing good human being and a wasteful thorn bush. And then Jesus uses language, right, talking about the wolf in sheep's clothing.
Yeah.
He doesn't say, oh, forgive the wolf and invite him in and convert him into a sheep, right? He's distinguishing between two types of people. There are the predators and there's the prey. There are the innocent people, the sheep. And, John chapter 10, right? He's talking about being the good shepherd, like the entire chapter. He's like, the hired hand cares nothing for the sheep. When the wolf comes into the sheep pen, the hired hand flees.
Yep.
Well, again, he's talking about people. He's talking about laying your life down to protect the innocent people. And when he's describing a wolf in sheep's clothing, he's not describing their behavior. He's describing who they are. He's describing their identity. Mm-hmm. And there's such a distinction, again, between somebody who struggles with sexual sin and somebody who intentionally, willfully preys on people for the purpose of they're out for blood, for their own gain, for their own pleasure. There's such a radical difference. And we don't make those distinctions in the church. Like I said, unless somebody disagrees with the leadership. I've been labeled a wolf before because I disagreed with people in leadership. And they're like, oh, you're a wolf in sheep's clothing. I'm like, literally, you can't hold a different opinion.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny you talked about that a wolf is not, it describes who they are. Mm-hmm. And I want to say this happened in the summer leading up to us leaving the Church of Christ. But and I'm not a Greek scholar. I didn't go to seminary, but I love Bible Hub. And,
oh yeah, me too.
I remember
because my Greek is rusty.
Yeah, I remember doing kind of a personal deep dive on Matthew. Is it 7:15 that verse about beware of wolves? What stuck out to me, and I just went and looked up that verse and read it in the Greek, and I looked at the translation of that word, beware of false prophets, or depending on the Bible version you're using. But in the Greek, that term false prophet or false teacher means religious pretender or religious imposter. And for me, that really explains so much.
Yes.
Because it wasn't just somebody who had, like you said, fallen into sin. It was somebody who was pretending.
Right.
Yes. Well, it's so interesting you bring that up because, automatically scriptures are coming to mind. I think of Paul in 2 Timothy 3:13. Paul's taught the whole chapter. 2 Timothy 3 is all about people who are imposters. They're masquerading. They're pretending. Mm-hmm. And Paul's message over and over again is avoid such people. And he's talking about in the church. He's talking about people who are already in the church. And he's like, avoid them, stay away from them, have nothing to do with them. These people are corrupt, they're warped. But then in chapter 3, verse 13, he says, while evil people and imposters go on from bad to worse, deceiving and being deceived. They get worse. They don't get better. That's why Paul says, stay away from them. Their minds are warped. They're twisted. They pretend. They masquerade. That's who they are.
Yeah.
And then other places, Paul uses such different language. And you have to look at everything contextually, right? Like when he's talking about the fruit of the Spirit in Galatians, I think it's Galatians 6:1, he says, if any of your brothers are caught in a sin, kind of interesting language, if any of them are caught in a sin, you who are spiritual should restore him gently. Such a radical difference in language. And so I always say we have to distinguish between the trap setters and the people who get caught in traps.
Yeah.
It's
there's such a clear distinction.
It struck a chord when you said that whole, because that last verse there that restore them gets so abused, as you well know. And if I'm looking over at my wife's notes, and I don't want to try to offside it or take too much here, but I would say that I think it'd be great this is primarily for the audience. I think all the parties involved in this interview know where we stand, but I'm thinking of the person watching. Could you help them understand? Okay, so I'm in the camp of I think I should restore everyone, right? I've come from a background of we love everyone, we want everybody to come in here, and Jesus is love, right? Which of course, yes, but there's more to it, obviously. But again, I'm playing their side, and so like you've already said some of it, but what would you say, or how would you help that person understand there is a distinction that, like you just described, there's the wolf, there's the hypocrite, there's the, what was the word you used? The pretender, religious pretender. It's not going to change. And they need, they need dealt with, they need put out, they need separated, they need whatever. And then there's the person who has sin, who is the guy who come off the street that's maybe on drugs or whatever, but he's seeking. He really does truly want to understand. He's like, he doesn't even know why he's here, but he knows I should be here. Holy Spirit's working in his life. He didn't even know it yet. How do you advise that we help them to do that?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is we just need discernment, and it's really not that hard. It's not like God gave only some of us the gift of discernment, and like all of us have the ability to discern. And people often go back to this idea like we're not supposed to judge people. Judge not lest you be judged, right? And they rattle off these scriptures, and like they cherry pick a certain select group of scriptures. Like let's just talk about judging, right? They'll pick that scripture out. Judge not lest you be judged. And they'll hammer that constantly. Judge not lest you be judged. We're not supposed to judge. Well, it's very interesting in 1 Corinthians 5. That's the case of the guy who's having relations with his mother, and everybody's proud about that. Like in the church in Corinth, Paul's saying, you all are doing things that the pagans don't even do.
Yeah.
And you're proud. And Paul goes on, like for the whole chapter, it's all about how to address this guy and how to address the church's response to him, because they just kind of turned a blind eye to it. And they were like, oh, well, a sin is a sin is a sin. And Paul's like, no. But he goes on and he's like, shouldn't you have rather kicked this man out? I forget what exact terminology he uses, but shouldn't you have removed this man and hand him over to Satan? Really interesting language. Hand him over to Satan, which reminds me again of like Romans 1, that people were so corrupt that God handed them over. God just kind of washes his hands and he's like, all right, you guys want to jump in both feet. I'm not going to hold you back.
There you go.
You do you. But, Paul says, hand them over to Satan. So that in the day of judgment, his soul might be saved. Kind of an interesting response there, Paul.
Yeah.
It's not kick him out and, because you should just bring shame on him. It's to bring him to his knees, to cut this guy to his knees. Paul's not like, oh, let's embrace this guy and forgive him, and he won't even know that he's being forgiven. For your own inner healing, let's forgive this guy, and he won't even know it. No, the gift to that man, and I truly believe this is a gift.
Yeah.
Paul says the best gift that we can give this man is to hand his you know what over to Satan, let Satan have his way with him, and let the guy come crawling back in repentance so that his soul might be saved. But then, interesting language, Paul says, not at all talking about the people out there in the world.
Right.
Paul
Yeah,
says, are we not to judge those from within the church?
Yeah.
It's a rhetorical question, and the answer is a resounding yes. We are to judge those within the church. Now, I don't think Paul's saying judgment as in we remove God from the judgment seat and we tell people whether they're going to heaven or hell. Paul's talking about making judgment calls. We've got to be able to distinguish between the guy who can be brought to his knees and brought to repentance, and I think that's the guy in 1 Corinthians 5. And clearly it worked because he comes back in 2 Corinthians chapter 2, and Paul says, now I want you to embrace this man because the punishment inflicted on him by the majority is enough. Interesting language.
Yeah.
Interesting language. But what you don't find is people masquerading and Paul using that language.
Mm-hmm.
Paul doesn't use that language for other people that masquerade, that pretend. For those people, he says, avoid such people, have nothing to do with. You'll hear this language repeated throughout the Bible, and you start picking up on these themes, and you're like, wait, Paul takes a very different approach to masqueraders, to pretenders, the people who pretend to be ultra religious. Why? Because they go on from bad to worse, deceiving and being deceived. It's that self-deception. Oh, me and God are cool. Like my dad wrote an entire, it's like a book on forgiveness from prison. At the same time, he was writing love letters to his minor victims that landed him in prison. Wow. And it was all like this, we're, to use his language, we're all as pure as the wind-driven snow. There are no, how did he put it? There are no second-class citizens in heaven. I mean, and he believes it.
Yeah.
As he's writing love letters and spending solitary confinement, he was sentenced to solitary confinement because the father of those girls contacted the prison and said, what in the you-know-what is he doing writing my children? How did this get through your mail system?
Yeah, I'd be furious.
And
so it's that kind of thing, right? It's the pretenders.
Yeah.
And it's not just Paul,
great,
like Peter and 2 Peter 2, right? The entire chapter. If you read it, like Peter is wicked. Like he is, I would not want to be in the crosshairs of Peter. But if you listen to who he's describing, he's describing, and he's talking about sexual predators, the false prophets, uses the same terminology, Vicky.
Yeah.
It's the false prophets who they prey on people barely escaping the flames. That's Peter's language. They find vulnerable people, vulnerable women, barely escaping the flames. They come in as the hero who's going to save the day. And then he says, they revel in the daytime while they feast with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They think it's funny. They think it's all sport for them.
Yeah. They get we've had
like a euphoria.
Unfortunately,
yeah,
several personal situations where we've been manipulated. And looking back, and one of the things that I wanted to talk about is during the period between February of 2024 and I would say shortly after we met you, one of the statistics that I stumbled upon, because I was really struggling. I've spent my whole life in the church. And so there's a level of indoctrination that is there. And
Yeah.
I was having a really hard time coming to terms with I've likened the church system to like a parent that should love you and protect you. And to
Yes.
find out that that system has let you down in the most horrible way, that was really, really difficult for me to wrap my mind around. But I came across a statistic back in early 2024, and it was a statistic from the court system, so it's pretty accurate, that of all CSA victims, the US court system pays out 35% of all monies paid out to CSA victims, 35% are paid out by elementary schools. And then 30% are paid out by religious institutions or churches. So you're talking 65% of all child SA originates from the two entities that they should be the safest. And I remember
Yes.
I kind of went on this rant with Kenny in the summer of 2024.
Oh, yes.
And I'm like, all my life, I've heard the church talk about staying away from worldly people. I was like, our kids are safer in the world than they are in church. And I just went
Yep.
off. And I think what has been most frustrating for me, I spent 16, 17 years in sales and marketing. So I very much am a person who looks at facts. And it's been difficult for me that it seems like people in the church just don't want to look at what's in front of their eyes. And I understand it's hard.
Mhm.
So I just wanted to maybe ask you to respond briefly on the facts that our kids have a much higher percentage. And as parents, we need to be at much higher guard within churches.
Mhm.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. So I don't know the exact statistics, but I mean, those are definitely in line with what you said, definitely in line with a lot of the research. The number one, and this has been for the last, I think it's been decades, like 15 or 20 years, the number one reason every single year, the number one payout for churches that are caught up in litigation, number one at the top of the list is always child sexual abuse, right? SA. Number one.
Yeah.
And then number two, interestingly, I think number two usually ranks like property or land disputes. And I'm like, so we're literally like, it just blows my mind. And I'm like, so we're fighting over property, over the building. Like
Yeah.
that's really important. We're suing each other over the use of the building or the use of the property or whatever. But bumped up at the top of the list, it's like we're getting sued over and over and over and over again, dishing out hundreds of millions of dollars every single year because we're not protecting kids. And so at some point you would think, all right, we need to come up with better bylaws that talk about use of our property. And we need to come up with a written policy that actually protects our children. Like if nothing else, so that we stop getting sued. But that shouldn't be the motivator. But oftentimes, like what I found is when I would train churches and they would hum around and they're always like, oh, how do we support this brother? Meaning not the abused victim, meaning the perpetrator. And I'm like,
Yeah.
you're asking the wrong question. Like the very fact that that's the first question that's on your mind, it boggles my mind. It boggles my mind. And I said, clearly your focus is on protecting the person who did this to these little children.
Yeah.
And so we ought to come up with policies that are harsh policies, like Jesus policies, like flipping tables over policies, that when anybody messes with one of our kids, like it is no holds bar. We are coming after you, the abuser. We're coming after you.
Yeah.
Jimmy, I want to say you were on a podcast or maybe you reposted it, but there was a podcast done maybe on the Preacher Boys. There was a woman talking about, and the whole topic was about allowing men with sketchy pasts into churches. And she said, because even if they're chaperoned, they're always thinking about it. They're having sex with kids in their mind.
Yes.
And I reposted that podcast segment. It was like a minute and a half chunk of it. And I actually had a local pastor message me and say, are you saying that we shouldn't allow men who have, blah, blah, blah in our churches. And it was just like you said, I'm like, where's the compassion for the kids?
Right.
You're mad at me because I don't want to let a former rapist into a church.
Yeah. Well, I'll never forget this, and I remember where that came from. It was an interview that I did with a prison psychiatrist or psychologist, who was just off the charts brilliant, like very, very smart. She had, like, she gave me a biography. She's like, "Can I give you a couple books, like scholarly books and articles to read?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure." So I'm thinking she's going to give me like a list of 5 or so. She gives me it was like 200 plus scholarly articles and books, and she's like, this ought to get you started. She's like, I do have a lot more. And I'm like, wow. Like, I mean, she was smart, very intelligent, but she's the one who told me that. And she's like, I counsel these people every single day, and she's like, I can tell you, she's like, it is always on their mind, and there are no exceptions. She's like, I've never found an exception where when you actually get to talk to these people, the perpetrators,
Yeah.
it is all they think about. They obsess about it. They dream about it. They talk about when they get out, like how they're gonna manipulate people and get close to children again. She's like, it's crazy. So anyway, she's the one who said that, and but I've read so much research that says the same thing, just over and over. They're like, there is no cure for it, for pedophilia, for whatever reason. I don't know what it is. I'm not interested in finding out why. And like, that's what I wrote about in my book. Everybody wanted to know the why, and they would ask it in a way. They didn't just come out and say, why did your dad do what he did? But they asked it, essentially it's what they were asking. They were like, was your dad ever abused as a kid? What they mean by that is, was there something that caused him to do this? This poor man, was there something that caused him? Help us to understand and have empathy and see where he's coming from. My response always is, first of all, no. Well, it depends on who you ask. Because for me, he flat out told me, I've never been abused. He's like, and I believe him.
Wow.
But then he told other people who he was manipulating.
Yeah.
He said, like, gave all these stories about how he was S8 as a kid, and it just really always was a part of his identity. And I'm like, really?
yeah, really.
So, it's that kind of stuff. So, like, for me, I was never interested. My response always was, what does it matter?
Right.
What does that matter if he was abused or not? What does that matter?
Yeah. You know it's wrong. I mean, it's wrong.
All of his victims are abused. I don't see them going out SAing other kids. In fact, it's quite the opposite. They're the most protective people.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's been my experience. Male and female victims.
Right.
They've been the most protective of children, like far more than me or you guys. They're very protective of children when they've been abused. And so this whole idea that, well, let's if maybe your dad was abused. So I didn't want to know the why, because I don't think we'll ever really know.
Mm-hmm.
I want to know the how. How did he do it?
Yeah.
How did he get away with it? How were we blind to it? How did we miss it? How did every single person in that man's life for a period of about 50 years, 5 decades, he was abusing victims? How did everybody miss it? Not one time did he get reported to the police until my mom, that we know of, until my mom and I went in. Not once was he reported to the police. How did that happen? How did he do it?
Yeah.
And you said your dad started abusing in his teenage years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Mm.
He said he was about 14 when he started abusing babies, infants.
Wow.
Whoa.
And so that's the thing. Like when you start to actually sit down and think about, like, and this is why I think people protect predators and churches don't want to hear about it. And they're like, oh, grace for all. Vicky, you're just you're a bitter woman. You have bitterness in your heart.
Oh man.
You're unforgiving. Right? They throw all these things at you. But if you actually stop and you have the stomach to sit down and think about what it would take. What would it take to go through, to actually follow through? I'm not talking about thinking those thoughts, because that's disgusting enough to think of a child that way. It's I can't begin to fathom what it would take even to think of a child that way.
Yep.
But they're not just thinking about it.
Right.
They're
following through.
They're pulling the I call it, it's essentially pulling the trigger, right?
Yeah.
It's the person who walks into a school. All of us get angry at different times, right? We get upset with people, we get mad, we get angry, sometimes we say things that we didn't mean to say. But to pull a weapon out and to walk into a school with a whole mess of little children, and to begin pulling that trigger over and over and over again as you're watching that carnage, what would it take to actually do that? And so when you think about that in terms of essaying a child, what would it take to actually think this through and plan it out and do it in a way where you don't get caught? And there's such a difference again between pornography, use of pornography, or whatever. Pick a gambling, pick something. There's
Pick
such a difference, because those people typically get caught. Almost always. If they don't confess, they get caught.
Right.
Child abusers don't. Either they're the luckiest people on the face of the planet, or they are incredibly skilled at manipulating people, at lying, at pretending, at masquerading. And once you know their tactics, and you know how they get their victims, and you know how they target them, and you know what they say to them, and you know what they do to their victims, it is so meticulous. So, and people are like, oh, well, they just, isn't it sad that your dad fell into sin? I'm like, he didn't fall into sin. It's like, what are you talking about? Well, everybody loses control at some point. We have a hard time controlling the flesh. I'm like, no, he had hyper control. You see, that's the difference between somebody who actually does fall into sin and somebody who's a child abuser. They have hyper control. They control the rate of their breathing. And I'm not kidding. They know how to talk to people. They know how to pace the conversation. They study all this stuff.
Right.
They study how to manipulate people, how to draw people into your conversation, how to make people feel like they're valued and like you're the only person who cares about them. They study this stuff. It's not about a loss of control. It's about hyper control. And so, yeah, is that the kind of person that you want sitting in your pew because you believe that Jesus wants everybody to be welcomed into the sheep pen? I don't.
I love you laid it out like that, because I think that really helps someone to see that there truly is a difference between the sinner, the which is all of us, the normal sinner, run of the mill, so to speak, struggling. And I guess, and yeah, that's even the better way to narrow it down a little bit. The person who's struggling with the sin versus the hyper, control, like you said, is going to help, or it should help someone to recognize that there's a difference, and it has a look, and that person isn't coming back. That they willingly, knowingly are trying to do this, and it's not like they stumbled across it. And oh my gosh, I just ran across pornography, and I'm trying to stop it, or I just ran into gambling was fun, and now it's turned into I can't quit. You insert your sin here. That is, well, I mean, I know we know that, but I am speaking to the audience. There's such a difference, and how we get that so mixed up that that there a difference exists and what it looks like, identifying it, realizing it, and saying we really do mark and avoid that person. That person really truly has got to be marked and said, nope, you are not allowed in here. And it's
and
like,
here's why.
And here's why. I love that.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
And it's like we're not allowed to say that in the church.
Yeah.
We can't avoid anybody. We can't mark and avoid anybody. Well, then we're not reading the same Bible. We're not reading the same Bible.
Exactly right. And then it goes back to I think, Vicky, you were saying it. then it's like well, if we tell this person that they can't come, then what about, and then they give some ridiculous example. What about, Mrs. Smith who gossips? I'm
Yeah.
like, not the same thing. I'll tell you exactly why. Not the same thing. Not the
Yeah.
same thing. It's
She's
just not the same thing. That's why.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
the guy who, again, there are so many different analogs for this, but like the school shooter, I can't imagine a church being like somebody who's in that still in that frame of mind. Like they did that, they planned that, they actually followed through with it.
Mm-hmm.
And let's say that for whatever reason, a judge or an attorney messed up the evidence, and everybody knows that it happened. It's on camera. Let's just use a really weird hypothetical. It's on camera. You can see the person doing it.
Right.
But for whatever reason, it's a hung jury or whatever. And that person shows up at church. I don't know of any church that would be like, all are welcome. Let's start a prayer team for this person. Let's start an accountability group. We'll assign an adult babysitter to them, and they're allowed in the building as long as they have a babysitter. And like, I never understood that. The whole accountability, they call it the accountability partner. I call it a babysitter. Like, if you need a babysitter, if you can't even go and walk throughout the building without having an assigned adult to babysit you, you don't belong here. I'm sorry. You don't belong here.
There's
if you can't be trusted to walk through this building without a babysitter, have a nice day.
Fantastic.
Bye.
Fantastic point. And how many times have we've run into that?
I want to try to cover two more topics before we leave.
Okay.
Our part company. The first one is, again, going back to statistics and a couple that really rattled me as just not only a person, but a mother and somebody who really had to come to the realization that I was going through a level of deconstruction of my faith. People who go through church abuse, and I'm not just talking about CSA, but for the topic, we'll just stick to that. But of people who are abused by religious leaders in that way, an average of 10% take their own life, and 25% walk away from God altogether.
Yeah.
Because the person who represented God for them abused them in the worst imaginable way. Then you have podcast after podcast after podcast almost mocking people who go through deconstruction. I have a heart for those people because I've walked that path. I don't see church leaders chasing after the people who have left the church, who have been abused, to figure out why, what happened. So I want you to just maybe comment on that real quick as a church leader too.
Yeah. So for me, it's so black and white. It's really simple. And I'm not a black and white thinker. Like I'm always, my mind it thinks in circles, and I'm an analytic thinker. But there's something in scripture that is so black and white to me throughout Jesus's ministry. And it's this. Number one, he defended innocent people. He defended the outcasts, the people who are thrown out by the religious society. And number three, very often, like you'll find this with Jesus, right? He says it often. He's like, if anybody would come after me, you must what? Deny yourself, pick up your cross, be willing to die and follow me. Like there are times where he heals people and he's like, you've got to follow me. Well, I have to bury my father. Nope. Let the dead bury their dead. Right. So he has these almost harsh demands that people follow him and follow him with everything that they have. But then you have other cases, and it's really, really interesting to me. And nobody talks about this. I don't hear anybody talking about this. He has other cases where people beg to follow him. Like the demoniac, the guy who had the legion of demons, begging to follow Jesus. And Jesus says, no. Not just no, like absolutely not. And then what's he say? Go be with your family. Or he'll say an equivalent of that, go in peace. The sinful
Mhm.
woman, the woman of the city, the prostitute in Luke chapter
Mhm.
7. I love that story because she enters the house, enters the house of Simon uninvited. Jesus says he's a rabbi, he's an honored guest, he's eating. So the meal it's already started. And like the way they ate the meals, they're on their side. There's like an elbow cushion and their feet are out to the side. If you actually look at what Luke does and the amount of detail that's in that story, like it makes me cry every time I read it. And I'm like, Jesus, like this woman comes in and she's so full of shame and she's crying and she's on her hands and knees behind Jesus. Luke is very specific. She's behind him as his feet are out to the side. She's grinding her feet and her tears, and I would argue snot as well, because when you cry profusely, it's snot, a lot of snot comes out. She's
Mhm.
literally on her hands and knees, grinding her hair into Jesus's feet and pouring oil on his feet with like I just can't imagine how humiliated a person has to be to like you want to talk about rock bottom being at a point where
Yeah.
you are absolutely so humiliated and so ashamed. And Simon, right? Simon's thinking, well, if he knew what kind of a woman this was, um, he'd get rid of her. And what Luke does, it's so fascinating. Luke says, and Jesus turned, looking at her, said to Simon, do you see her? And those 3 words, 4 words, do you see her? It makes every hair on my body stand up. And I'm like, he is literally locking eyes with her. She's been behind him the whole time doing this. Jesus turns, looks her in the eye. And with Simon now behind Jesus, he says, Simon, do you see her? And I don't think he meant do you physically see her? And I know because of Greek. Sorry, Vicky.
Go to Bible
I'm gonna
Hub.
go to
honey.
Bible Hub today.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jimmy.
So the Greek word that Luke uses is very intentional, and it means, do you see beyond the person at what's inside of them? Do you see her? From the minute I came in, you never offered me a drink. You didn't offer to clean my feet. She'd been wiping my feet with her hair and with her tears and with this oil. So like he goes through the whole thing, and then the very next thing that Jesus says to the woman is, your sins are forgiven. That's fascinating to me. This woman who had been used by every man in her life, most likely. We can kind of fill in the gaps, but
Yeah.
she's been used. She was a plaything to all these men.
Mhm.
And Jesus says, your sins are forgiven. And then, of course, they're all like, wow, what's this about? And so then Jesus tells her to get up and he says, go in peace. Never asked her to follow him. Doesn't say, well, now you got to find a local synagogue and become a member. And if you don't, like doesn't question her faith, doesn't question her beliefs, doesn't question her past beliefs, what she formerly believed in God. You want to talk about somebody who needed to do some deconstruction in her faith? I guarantee that woman had a lot to deconstruct in her life. And Jesus doesn't call her or even demand. He doesn't Hebrews her that those who forsake the assembly, you've forsaken the assembly. He's like, go in peace, go home,
Yeah.
go figure this out, go be with your family. I love that. And Jesus does that repeatedly. And so we have to look at things contextually. That's what I would say to people who are deconstructing. Who are we to point the finger at somebody and say, I've got to deconstruct some of the toxic things that I was taught in my life that just aren't true about Jesus and about the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
I think Jesus's message to all of them would be, go in peace.
Yeah.
I think that I personally thank you for that, because I know that's something good for me to hear, and I'm sure Vicky as well, and people watching, because that word deconstruct has gotten such a terrible. I was just in a conversation yesterday that with a gentleman who took it very well, but that conversation was really trying to get people to see it's turned into a bad word in our culture, but it's not. You
Yeah.
really should be able to challenge what you believe. I tell my boys, I know why you believe what you believe. Don't just because I told you, because we told you. That's great that you accept it, but at some point, challenge it. At some point, figure it out for yourself. Come with questions, and
Yes.
always be willing to look at it a second time, third time, fourth time. That's not questioning God. And although we can question him,
Yeah.
he's a big boy. But I mean, it's not questioning like him directly. It's questioning, what have I been taught? Because that leads to these toxic
Right.
things. That leads to stuff like what we said, where, oh, we just let everybody in the church. And like, where do you think all that comes from? That comes from being taught something,
Yeah.
a tradition, a whatever that doesn't belong. And so this could be its whole
Exactly
topic.
right.
Great.
So the whole forgiveness thing too, like I don't want to get off on my soapbox. You guys probably know my stance on that, but like I look at that woman and I was like, all right, forgive like the Lord forgives. That's whatever they throw that cliche out there, so let's just use it. All right, forgive like the Lord forgives. If you're a victim of abuse and you don't forgive like the Lord forgives, then you're harboring bitterness in your heart, and like they end up getting shooed out the church. Ironically, it's the victims of abuse who get shooed out the church because they're unforgiving hearts.
Yeah.
And you look at the way that the Lord forgives, just that story that I just told. The way the Lord forgives, he's not doing it for his own inner healing. He's not like, well, this woman, I'm going to secretly forgive her and she won't even know that I'm doing it, but it's for my own inner healing and my own inner peace, right? The gift was exactly for her.
Yeah.
The person you forgive, number one, are they repentant? Are they bearing fruit in keeping with repentance, which is a precondition to us giving forgiveness to other people?
Yep.
If they're on their hands and knees and they're wiping our feet with their tears and their hair, your forgiveness to that person is exactly a gift to that person.
Mm-hmm.
And this whole idea of forgiveness, it's been so weaponized. And I'm fully convinced, after reading that Bible study that my dad wrote from prison, I'm fully convinced that our theology of forgiveness began to shift because it was the abusers in the pulpit who were justifying what they were doing. And so they were like, yeah, we'll make this sound really good. Because it is really convincing, right? Like, you'll never find healing unless you forgive.
Sure.
Says who? Where do we get that from?
Yeah.
What victims need is justice, not forgiveness. They're not like, oh, if I forgive this person, life will go on and I'll find my inner healing. No, they're like, I want to know that this person has stopped. I want to know that people care enough. You know the teenage girl, her name's Hannah Campbell. She was the one that in front of the school board member was like, "You're hot." Did you guys see that?
No.
That was just a couple weeks ago.
Mm.
And it's a school board member who like pulled her in for a hug. Like she was giving a speech to the school board. And he's like, "You're hot." And then like it didn't stop there. Like it was really gross. And then he pulls her in for a hug and he's like eyeballing her, like looking her up and down. And everybody in that room laughs. Like a nervous laugh. Not one person defended that girl. She came back up a couple days ago and she gave a speech to that board. It was fire. It was awesome. First thing she said, and I was like, this girl is theologically sound. I don't know where she got this from, but the first thing she said, she looked at the board and she goes, "First of all, I'm going to start by saying I do not forgive you. You all stood there while he was doing this. Not one person stepped in and defended me. Not one person cared. Not one person showed that this kind of behavior is unacceptable." So like, and she talked about how that hurt her just as much as what this man did to her. And I was like, it's spot on. It's fire. So yeah, it's great.
I'll have to look that up now.
I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast that there was a situation that was kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back with us in the summer of 2024. there was a church member from a different congregation that had called me and let me know that this man was attending, and the men in leadership decided, they weren't gonna tell his sins to the congregation. They were just, he served his time, so it was done.
Yeah.
And I feel like I really did my due diligence. I found his court case. I found his name, found his court case. It was all publicly documented. And I actually reached out to his daughter. Her and I had a very long conversation, and she gave me a lot of insight, even above and beyond the documented court case.
Mhm.
And she ended up writing a book about what her dad did to her. And
Wow.
one of the things she told me, her book's called Redemption, I believe. It's Chelsea Freeman. But she was raised in the Church of Christ, and her dad was one of the preachers. She said that just for her own closure, that she wrote her dad a couple letters and while he was in prison and said, "Why did you do this to me?" And she was just looking for closure. And she
Mhm.
said that her dad wrote her letters back, and not only did he not take accountability,
Of course.
but he said because there was a couple of his male friends in the church that also used her. Um, Her dad wrote her a letter from prison and said, "These other men are waiting for you to call and apologize to them." And so when I remember when Kenny and I did the initial podcast with you and we were talking about what repentance actually looks like, and then like I reflect back on this whole situation, that man's not repentant. So
No.
you've got somebody who,
No.
okay, so he served 12 years in prison, but he's back out now, and he never did take accountability for his crimes.
Nope.
Yeah.
And you know,
So, and that was where she had sought some advice from this friend on
Yeah,
how to
this
just
lawyer
kind of
friend.
warn the congregation, and she was scolded for that. And Vicky's made out to be the gossip, and where's the forgiveness, and that's the point that she left
Yeah.
out there. And it's like, why is it? Sorry, I didn't mean to speak in the mic there so loud. Why is it that if we say something that we're the bad guys?
I don't know.
You
I don't know.
it's
So
where did
let me
that come from?
let me ask a question about that guy. Is he on a sex offender registry?
So what happened with him is his conviction came 3 or 4 years before Ashley's Law was passed.
Yeah.
So he's a tier 3 sex offender.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think that's the highest.
Yeah, it is.
He normally would have been on the registry for life, but because he was convicted before Ashley's Law, he fell off after 10 years.
Yep.
So he literally fell off in January of 2024, 7 months before I talked to his daughter. And that's why she was so freaked out. And that's why she published her book. So he's off the sex offender registry. So
Yeah.
I was kind of
Yeah.
in this weird, and I knew that when I called my attorney friend, because I'm like, okay, this is not black and white. The church is technically not breaking any law because he's off the offender registry, but I felt like they had a moral obligation, knowing what I know about pedophiles, to
Mhm.
alert the congregation. And that's
Right.
when I was just chewed up and spit out.
I would agree with you wholeheartedly. So I'm going to share a couple stories. One, first of all, it is really, 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 really confusing to me that when somebody is on a sex offender registry, and whether they're tier 3 or not, but especially tier 3. So tier 3 SVP, which is sexually violent predator, when you have that designation by the court in Pennsylvania, and it's probably this way in most states, if not all, that's where the state police will go and they will knock every door of every youth serving organization, which includes churches. I've gotten that knock on the door before when we had a tier 3 SVP move within a mile radius of the church building. So it's churches, schools, daycare centers, etc.
Yeah.
Those
Mhm.
police officers knock on the door. They have a printed off copy of the sex offender registry with the person's picture, with their crimes listed, and they say this person is a very violent person. Do not ever let your children have any interaction with this person. Do not let him. He is not allowed anywhere near this building. All
Wow.
right. So the state
Wow.
police don't do that just because it's fun.
Yeah.
Right? There's a very specific reason why they do that. And yet churches, when you talk about printing that off, printing one copy off and posting that in the lobby, that all of a sudden you're like, well, don't you believe in forgiveness? That's always it's like the staple response. Don't you believe in forgiveness? No, not really for that person. No. you want to make people mad. That's but you know, I'm like, how do you get to circumvent the law?
Yeah.
Like, you are literally hiding a public document on purpose. Like, you have to go out of your way to be covering up. Oh, that's not a cover up. We just believe in grace. No, it really is a cover up. Let's call it what it is. This is a cover up. It's a public document.
Yep.
They're on a public registry for a very specific reason and for very specific crimes that they were tried for and that they spent time in prison for.
Yeah. Amen. Yeah.
And yet churches, they hide that. So that's number one. Number two, I had a very good preacher friend who is now not in ministry anymore, and I think this was part of what burned him on ministry. But it was a juvenile offender that was in his church. And I'll spare the graphic details, but there was a very, very visible sign that this juvenile offender, I think it was like 15 years old, had SA'd in a very violent way in the church building during their church service. This little, I don't know, like 6 or 7 year old boy.
Wow.
My friend is the one who reported. They, of course, did a forensic interview right away. Like, no question what happened. There was zero question what happened. That boy was in the process of being convicted, the offender. And my friend, who was the minister, said, that boy the juvenile offender cannot be on this campus, on this property, period.
Yeah, ever.
He got a letter from the offender, the juvenile offender's attorney, threatening a lawsuit against the church and him personally, and said, you will allow my client has not been tried in the court of law. My client has not admitted, which is false, because the offender wrote a letter, like signed a statement, wrote a letter. My friend, the minister, read the letter where he confessed to it. And the attorney said, if you don't allow this person, this 15-year-old boy to come to church, we're going to sue the church and you personally. And so he came to me, like, he was in tears, and he's like, what do I do? I was like,
Wow.
I would get sued before I allowed that kid. I would physically grab that kid and his parents by the neck and shove them out the door.
Yeah.
I would risk getting sued before I would ever let that offender come back into the church. That's a violent, very violent offender. So it's a crazy world we live in, but I don't know. I don't understand attorneys. I don't understand churches. I don't understand insurance companies that turn a blind eye. There are insurance companies that they're like, oh, here, let's print this 1-page document on how to protect your church. Like, it's insanity.
I just wanted to kind of close out with your experience dealing with advocacy and maybe some of the frustrations that you've dealt with. Because I know it really, Kenny and I considered shutting down the podcast altogether.
A very current case in point, you guys are probably seeing this publicly played out on my Facebook. I worked with the U.S. Marshals for a really horrific case, and this was first of all, it was a kidnapping. And then I got ridiculed for saying that. They're like, no, it was a mother protecting her kids. I'm like, yeah, she believed that she was protecting her kids at the time. Now she looks back and she's like, I was brainwashed by these people. But it's like she got involved in this cult and had planned I don't want to get you tagged here, but take her own life after taking her kids kind of scenario. And it wasn't just she thought about it, like it was meticulously planned out. I was read her journal by the U.S. Marshals, and we were 100% up against the clock. Her own oldest daughter, who was 14 at the time, was on the podcast, Chasing Evil podcast. She told her own story. She talked about all the things that I witnessed, and it wasn't just their family. I've talked to about 12 families that have been involved in this same exact cult. And it is really messed up stuff that these victims are having done to them. And so anyway, I had warned other advocates, because it's a victim's advocate who's doing all this stuff. And I had warned other people. I was like, I have receipts. I'm like, look, this went to U.S. Marshals. I've had interviews with FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C. over this case. There's a missing kid that's been missing since 2018. We still haven't found him from this same circle.
Wow.
We went to Homeland Security, HSI. I have a Homeland Security report that's sitting in my file folder with all these other files. So it went to National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Like, this is not hearsay. Like, this stuff is being done. I went to other advocates and I stuck my neck out there, and because I knew that I would get backlash. But I had another person who was really urging me. They're like, look, we know that publicly right now you can't state names, but like, you need to warn people. I was like, all right, fine. So I started like phone calls and emails with like really well-respected victims advocates with child sexual abuse.
Mm-hmm.
There was one out of all of the ones that I talked to who was like, okay, what do we do? How do I help you? All the rest of them said things like, well, even if what you're saying is true. I'm like, it is true. I'm like, I literally have an FBI, I have a Homeland Security report about this case. I have emails. I have hundreds of conversations that I have I have the receipts. I will email you every single file. They're like, well, we're not really interested. And they're like, even if that were the case, what if this lady thinks that she really is helping these people? I'm like, what does it matter? Like, she's literally making kids disappear, literally brainwashing people, casting demons out of people, telling them that they're full of demons and casting demons out. Like, how is that okay? So these other advocates, and I put them in quotation marks, and you can see them coming out now, and I'm just letting the conversation roll out. I have other people who are like, why don't you name the person? I'm like, I'm just letting all the crazy people talk, because they're showing their true colors. But like, people saying that Jimmy Hinton's not trustworthy now, and why are you coming out with this now? And I'm like, it's not my story to tell. Genevieve told her story.
Yeah.
I wasn't going to publicly share a victim's story on her behalf. I don't roll like that. So anyway, that's one of the big reasons why I started stepping back from advocacy, was just seeing the response from people in that community. I want nothing to do with it. It is very toxic. So my message to victims is, and it's sad because it didn't used to be this way. Like, it used to be a trustworthy community. I don't know what happened, but it is a poisoned community. It is toxic. I would say find a close friend. You don't need somebody who has the title of victim's advocate to be able to process your trauma. Find a close friend and share with your friend. I'd say right now, 9 times out of 10, you're going to get better advice from your close friend who actually will sit and listen to you than you will from anybody who's a professional victim's advocate.
Or
I
in the
hate to
church.
say that, but that's it. It's gotten that way. I will say that there are some circles that, if they're not linked or not previously linked to the church, they're actually really good. Like our victim services in Somerset County here, man, they're phenomenal. And the ladies that work there, like I have the utmost respect for them. There are people out there who care, but I would be very, very careful about entering into the victims advocacy community online
Yeah.
because it's not what it used to be.
That's a shame.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's like with a lot of other things. It's that type of field tends to attract a certain personality, and you
Yes.
just have to be careful. So,
Yes.
all right. Well, I think this is a great place to stop. I know you have things to do, but we really appreciate you coming on again, and
Absolutely.
Thank you
hopefully
for
we
having
can
me.
keep this conversation going down the road.
Yeah,
Amen.
for sure.
All right, Jimmy.
All right. Well, thank you guys.
Yep. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
You too.
Well, that was a really good conversation with Jimmy.
Very.
I want to say the first time and last time we interviewed him was around May or June of 2024.
Mm-hmm.
And we were just in a whole other season back then.
We were still in Church of Christ.
We were still in the Church of Christ. We were right smack dab in that, at least for me, it really ramped up, at least the feelings of anxiety and something is not right here, started during a phone call in February of 2024. And then that led me down a deep hole of discovering all of the pedophiles in the system and reaffirming a lot of the fears and the weird comments that I had heard made, which ultimately led me to finding Jimmy's blog, which it's so sad to find out that he was hacked, but and then reading his book, reaching out to him. We drove out to Pennsylvania to meet with him. And man, as a Church of Christ preacher, and we were still in the Church of Christ then, and then to sit and talk to him about, I got hair on my microphone here, about his experience finding out his own dad was a pedophile, and then listening to him talk about some of the advocacy work that he's done with the church and the frustration that it has brought. And I do think that he kind of was, what's a word, maybe
More spicy.
held back. Well, no, last time.
Oh, last time. Yeah.
Last time I think he was maybe more reserved. And looking back, I totally get it because we were still in the Church of Christ back then.
Yeah.
And
for clarity, for the audience sake, he was in his version of Church of Christ. I don't want to say version, but they did only use instruments, but they were what's considered.
No, they were not instrumental.
They did. I meant to say not.
Okay,
I
just
thought I said
clarifying.
not instruments. I meant to say non-instruments.
Yeah.
I must have said instruments. Non-instruments. They sang, which I love, by the way, but that's what they did. However, they were institutional, and there was my quotation marks, meant they would give to organizations and some other like local charities or things of that nature. Well, that was a big no-no.
Yeah.
So the only reason I'm pointing that out is because they were a little. I really do feel like, and Jimmy, if you're watching, this is for you. I feel like they're a little bit more heading towards Christ, right? Instead of this follow the rules set, they're more of, hey, this is how we want to do it, but we still love everybody else. Jimmy was a prime example. He worked with other churches for the advocacy, as Vicky was kind of alluding to, and he has said in his videos, which I'm guessing aren't even out there anymore, unfortunately.
No, his YouTube channel's fine.
Okay, good.
It was his website that was hacked.
Okay,
so yeah.
So I'm glad to hear that because you can go watch those videos and see that stuff. But anyway, I don't want to get too far off topic other than to say it was kind of a breath of fresh air to talk with someone like that. Even back then while we were in Church of Christ, and then now later to do this interview that you just watched and see some of the changes and find out where he's at now. But that was really fun.
It was obviously there's been a few days passed between Jimmy Hinton's interview and now because we kind of have to do this in bits and pieces as we have time. Right. But Kenny and I laughed a little bit because when, like I said, when we interviewed him the first time, he was probably a bit more reserved. Part of it was he just didn't know us that well. And I think part of it is he knew we were still in the non-institutional churches of Christ. So I think he was kind of, I don't know, maybe watching his wording a little bit. But after this last interview, we were both like, ooh, he was kind of spicy. But it was refreshing because you felt that palpable anger and frustration at the system. And that's exactly where we are.
Yeah, and when I just every time I hear that word, the system, I think it's worth noting that what we're talking about, and I know it seems obvious, and for most it probably is, but specifically, there's a few that don't necessarily get it, right? They just think Christianity is Christianity is Christianity. Yeah, that's true. It is. If you're a Christian, if you've been saved, you call Christ your Lord and Savior, and you know that's genuine to you, then you're a Christian, right? And of course, that's going to spark probably a lot of people in the comments. Sorry, not sorry. But the system looks like a bunch of different things, but it is always running in the background. It's always kind of the framework that you're allowed to work in. And if you step outside of it, you're out. You're out. And Jimmy, I feel like, I don't want to speak for him, but was trying to work inside that and realized ain't going to happen. I'm getting more help from people outside of the system in the secular world, quote unquote, to help and advocate for those who are in need, those who have been abused. And he's like, and I'm going to go there.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how I felt he was saying it. He was like, I'm going to go wherever I need to go to get it done. And if it won't happen in the church, which is where it should happen, I don't know if you remember me saying in the video, the church should be the best at protecting the victims.
And they're the worst.
We're the worst. You know, that's not everybody, obviously. So if you're not one of those people, don't take it personally.
But in the church system, I would venture to say it's the majority.
It's too much, for sure. Majority, it's too much, right? Shouldn't be happening in the schools and it shouldn't be happening in the church. And what did Vicky say? Those were the top two by statistics.
Yeah.
Not bending the statistics around to make it look good. That's court statistics. That is what's happening.
Yep.
And that's sad.
Yeah.
Super sad.
One of the situations that we touched on briefly, which we're going to do an entire podcast on this, but there was a situation. So after we had the interview with Jimmy, there was a woman that called me so we're in the central Ohio area, and there's probably, I don't know, within a 30-mile radius, there's 5 or 6 churches of Christ that are considered non-institutional.
Right. Yep.
I got a phone call from somebody at a different congregation who was concerned about this man who had recently begun attending and had this criminal past. And I was trying to find a way to be able to warn the parents and kids that this guy was there, because I was told the men in leadership had made a determination not to tell anybody. Yeah. And that whole situation really came back to burn me. But when, there was a phone call that I received in February of 2024, which led me down a deep rabbit hole, finding out all of this stuff, also getting confirmations, because I had seen so much, but both of us had seen so much really despicable behavior from men who were claiming, anyway, that's a whole other thing, not to get off track, which that rabbit hole ultimately led us to Jimmy. We did the interview with Jimmy in around May, early June 2024. And we were already highly frustrated. Yeah. We had already had discussions about stepping away for a time and just really looking at their doctrine outside of the influence, because at that point, and this is another thing we discovered about the churches of Christ, especially when we say churches of Christ, we're talking about the non-institutional. Non-institutional. Yeah. So we had seen that if you approached somebody in the Church of Christ with maybe a concern on their particular view of baptism, or maybe their particular view of instruments during worship and anything like that, what we found very quickly is they all ended up in the same spot. So they seemed very accommodating of questions, but we discovered very quickly that they would allow you to ask questions, but then they would reel you back in. And it didn't take us long to see that. And so by the time early 2024 came around, there were many, many situations that had all happened simultaneously and had us at a point of deep frustration. And we wanted to step away and study for ourselves. We didn't want the influence of the Church of Christ preachers. And so anyway, by the time that initial interview with Jimmy Hinton happened, we were already considering backing away. Right. We had considered working within the system too, but we had also looked at, I don't know if we can stay. And then the situation in the summer was kind of the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back. And yeah, so I didn't mean to go off on a long rabbit trail about that, but I remember that we had been immediately cut off by our Church of Christ community, and it was very it was a feeling of deep betrayal.
Yeah.
And I remember I had actually reached out to Jimmy after realizing that our entire Church of Christ community had cut us off. We had already talked about having future podcasts with Jimmy. And I remember in my mind thinking, well, that's not going to happen now because he's probably going to cut us off too.
Right.
And I reached out to him proactively and I said, hey, I just want to let you know that we left the Church of Christ, and I know we had talked about doing future podcasts, and I understand basically if you don't want to talk to us anymore. I'm heavily paraphrasing that. And I'll never forget, he emailed me back and he's like, absolutely not. There was none of that from him.
Right.
And so that was refreshing. And so we definitely saw a different side to those who are outside of the non-institutional Church of Christ world, very much more accommodating. So,
Yeah, and it brings me back to, you'll probably hear me harp about this too much, and sorry, but the system, right? That system, and that system dictates that. And when I say a system again, it's gonna refer to every little group, right? It's gonna refer to Church of Christ, non-institutional, non-instrumental. It's gonna refer to certain church groups in general and at large, like the church you walk across the street, and it's on your local street corner, I should say. Not everywhere is like this, but there tends to be a framework, is probably a good way to say it. And the framework, unintentionally or not, intentionally or unintentionally, it's if you're inside the rules, you can ask the questions that you want and you can do whatever, and there's great fellowship. But as soon as you kind of question that and step outside of the rules, whether they're actually laid out very easy to spot or they're not, then you're out. And so what Vicki was talking about is we expected that response from Jimmy. And we expect, because we had already received that when we left the charismatic world. We had already received that when we stepped away from the non-institutional, non-instrumental churches of Christ that we were in. And it just seemed like that was going to be par for the course. And he did not do that. And we have discovered that there are many who don't, who get it, who understand what I will say is true Christianity. You love those people. You put proper boundaries when you must, of course. That's what Jimmy was talking about with keeping people out of the church that didn't need to be there, right? These pedophiles, that's someone who needs to stay outside. And he was not apologetic about it, and I appreciated that. But then there's a lot who we keep in, and if we have disagreements, or even if it's just something you're swaying a little bit, or you're questioning, that was still welcome. And that's how it should look. It really should. That's the showing the love of Christ. And I really appreciate that Jimmy modeled that. And I appreciate that there's been others in our life who have done the same. And I think that if you watch some of our other videos or see some of our other posts, you'll understand that there are many people who have went through the same process. Whatever church label you want to put on it, they were a part of some organization. And for lack of better terms, they got kicked out. That's the simple way to say it. There's usually lots of nuances to it. But they simply challenged what they saw. Something wasn't right. They said, hey, I don't understand what I'm looking at. This isn't right. Or they called something out and you're done. Sorry, can't be here.
yeah.
And that, Mike Adams, if you ever see any of those videos from us that we did, or the video we did with him, or any of his posts, you'll see he calls it the box church. And being outside of the box church is kind of where we are.
Yeah.
It
is where we are.
Well, yeah, not kind of, it is. And, but it's finding that church is the body of Christ, right? We are the church, not the building, not the structure that's given to us on Sunday morning that says, you must look like this, and if you don't, then you're out. And I know that people won't agree with that, but if you play it out, that's kind of what really happens. And so we're here to try to reach those and help those who are in that camp, who need support, who are just looking for a community. And we're navigating that ourselves. We don't even know for sure what all that looks like, but here we are. So
Well, and if you guys remember during the video, I think towards the end, Jimmy had talked about his frustrations with the advocacy world.
Mm-hmm.
And he was specifically talking about, advocacy as operating within the church. And he talked about how if we think the church environment is toxic, then the advocacy world is a lot more toxic than even the church.
Yeah.
And I can speak to that personally as someone who tried for more than 2 years to bring awareness to the abuse that was going on, and just getting, and I'm this term gets overused, but this is an applicable place, is completely gaslit, which by definition is denying somebody's reality over and over, by the men in leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And when Jimmy talked about how the what did he call it? He talked about that. I'll just say non-Christians get it.
Oh, the secular world.
The secular world was a term he used. The secular world gets it. How would they handle a convicted pedophile returning to church services around children?
Mm-hmm.
The Christians, far and away, would say that he needs to be back in the church. The secular world would be like, heck to the no.
Right.
Statistically, any psychologist, any professional, anyone who's worked with convicted pedophiles will tell you that they don't change. Their behavior does not change. And if you remembered in the interview with Jimmy, he talked about this. They are always thinking about it. They're always trying to figure out how to manipulate to get back to abusing kids. Yeah. That is their ultimate goal. And they will say and do everything
Whatever it takes
to get back in a position. And so this is a particular area of interest for me as someone who is, when I was in nursing school and then throughout this whole journey, has really interested me because I've seen connections between certain groups, and it seems like an increased incidence of child sexual abuse. Predators are always going to go where the victims are. And one of the things that I know Kenny didn't grow up in the church, but I did. From the time I was a young girl, it's been beat into my head. Forgive, forgive, forgive. Be damned, the other verses that talk about how to actually deal with wolves. But you're talked about, it's beat into your head to forgive. And so when you have a church community that has been taught for years about all of these verses about forgiveness, well, yeah, that's an attractive place for a predator to go. That's why I believe, I think I really do believe that that's why there's such a high percentage of predatory type personalities that work in church leadership.
Simply put, they will go where there's the things that they desire.
Mm-hmm.
And the things that they desire will be children. So they're going to go where there's the most children, hence why it's churches and schools. And they'll go wherever the softest target is, which is generally the church. And the school is too, but the school tends to be, it's just more of a volume, right? There's just more kids. Church schools do tend to want to try to stop it more than churches do. But there's just more chances for it because there's so many more kids.
Yeah.
Regardless of how the statistics exactly play out, it's very obvious that that's where it's happening, like Vicky said. And the forgiveness piece, one thing that kind of stuck with me after Jimmy spoke, he said, think about what it takes
to
do this. And I've heard this, but it really brought back to mind fresh when Jimmy said, you have to realize that this person has not just thought about it. They've not just fantasized a little bit about it. They've planned it. They've went through all the variables, and then they committed it. They pulled the trigger was what he used. And that takes, I'll say a special person, but effectively that takes someone whose mind something's wrong, right? It's
depraved.
Broken, it's depraved. Something's terribly, terribly wrong if you are willing to actually commit that crime, that act with a child, especially, you be an adult and you're going to do that to a child, especially any child, period. But the younger, the more grotesque it becomes. That is unrecoverable. It just is. Now, I know, and I want to play both sides of this argument just so the audience can hear it, because I can already hear the people, and somebody's typing into comments, well, God can change a heart. God can do anything. Of course he can. And you would see that in that person. You see, here's your key, guys. You would see that. So let's say that statistically, clinically, a pedophile is never going to change, right? The mind is rewritten in a way that it's okay to do that to a child. If God, supernatural master of the universe, intervenes to that person and changes them, you'll see it. You will see it. What do I mean? They're not going to want to be around children. They're going to want to be kept. They are going to push for safeguards. Don't put me in leadership over children. Don't leave me in a position where there's children. I want to be in the body of Christ, but keep the children away from me. They're going to want to tell everybody, this is what happened. This is what I did. I am beyond ashamed of it. And to Jimmy's point, it never happens.
And
it doesn't happen. Go ahead.
To tag team on what Kenny talked about when he said that a truly repentant pedophile is not going to want to be around kids. I'm just going to touch on a story that we were personally involved in. I was made aware of a man who had worked at several Church of Christ congregations, beginning out west, and worked at a couple states. He was kept getting fired because he had been skinny dipping with teenage boys. He had been fired from a church for inappropriate contact around minor boys with regards to other activities. I'm not going to go into detail on that right now. And then ultimately he came into the Ohio churches. And when I received a phone call about him, it was described to me that he was a single man. I want to say late 50s, early 60s, had never been married, had been fired from multiple churches for highly inappropriate contact around teenage boys. That was evidently his preference was teenage boys. And it was described to me that when he came to church, he always made it a point to hang around the teenage boys. Like, this was widely known.
Yeah, that's what made it.
And his past was brought up, the fact that he was fired from multiple other churches was brought up to the men in leadership. And he told them, well, I won't do that anymore. And so the men in leadership were like, okay, well, yeah. I mean, not sorry for my sarcasm, but it
was overlooked.
It's ridiculous.
It was overlooked.
This man is exhibiting a clear pattern of behavior. He's never been married. He's had a history of doing this behavior. And by the way, one of the things that pedophiles do, and I think Jimmy brought this up at least a couple instances in our recent interview, he said when pedophiles, and I'm going to say pedophiles and also people who exhibit predatory type behavior like this man I'm talking about, because this man has never been convicted. He only has a history of inappropriate behavior. But one of the things that Jimmy said that predator type, pedophile type men do is if they're confronted on their behavior, they will always have an excuse. Well, that child, they wanted me, or I got drunk and it was 50 years ago. And, there's all these excuses. When this man was caught skinny dipping with teenage boys, he didn't say he was sorry.
Right.
His comment was, well, there was no girls around. It was okay. That was his comment.
Hanging with the guys.
Yeah, I was just hanging out with the guys. And this type of man, and there's several more instances besides this man that are just examples here in our little Central Ohio community.
Yeah.
Just our little group of churches here. And I won't go into those, but all of this build up and build up and build up. And I remember because Kenny and I weren't raised in the Church of Christ. And at our old church, there was no behavior like this. They had their own problems, but it wasn't anything like what we saw in the Churches of Christ.
No.
And I remember thinking to myself, are you guys serious? Like, it blew me away. That was the first time I had ever dealt with churches covering up sexual abuse. I knew it existed, but prior to this personal experience, I had only read about it in like newspaper headlines. You know, I think everyone's heard about the Catholic Church issues that happened years ago and the Southern Baptist Convention. You know, but when you're reading it on news headlines, it's different
Yeah, sure.
than when you personally experience it. And I think that really brought a level to Kenny and I that, yeah, it's just, it really, and we didn't want our boys around that.
No, it hits it, as they say, it hits differently. Um, you know it's out there, you know it exists, but when it comes into your world, it does change your perception. And I think that's natural. I think somebody might even watch these videos and be like, okay, I agree it's out there, but they never personally experienced it. Or they might say, well, it's not in my church, and I hope it's not, and that's amazing if it isn't. Fantastic, and I mean that genuinely. But understand that it is out there. Understand that it could even still be in your church, and you just don't know it. Regardless of what is the truth is actually going on, what is reality is it is out there, and the reality is those who have been affected. That's the ones that we care about. Those who it affects, those who have it's hit personally.
Keep talking.
That is who we're reaching out to. That's who we're I won't say fighting for, but effectively we are trying to help represent you and also get those stories out there because it's our view that those stories aren't getting out there enough. That because of cover up, or I'm going to steal if anybody knows the name Mike Winger, cover up culture. I'm going to use that word. It's very applicable. There's a lot of cover up culture going on. There's a lot of we'll just kind of push this away. This kind of didn't happen, and that's not okay, especially in the body of Christ. Not okay in any realm, and it shouldn't be okay in the church. We said it in the last video. It's the worst. It should be the best in the church, and it's not. It's more like the worst.
Yeah.
And so, our true goal and hope is just get that word out. The little sphere of influence that we have, work within that. And for those out there that watch it, you're in the same boat. You're like, well, I can't reach hundreds and hundreds of people. You don't have to. It's whatever is in your circle. That's who you can reach. That's who you can talk to. That's who you can advocate for. That's all you have to do.
Yeah. We mentioned earlier in the podcast with Jimmy, we talked a little bit about how we met him. And I mentioned that Jimmy when I first found him on his website, which is no longer there, but Jimmy wrote a book about his experience with his own father. His father was a Church of Christ preacher in Somerset, Pennsylvania for 28 years. And he was found that entire time to be abusing young girls. And I believe that he has a life sentence. I don't believe he's going to have a chance for parole. But Jimmy wrote a book about his experience. So we're going to give a little plug.
Yep.
The Devil Inside. It's an awesome read. You can read it in a couple of days.
Yep.
But he goes through the situation with his dad, how he caught his dad, and his own kind of deconstruction as a result of having a dad who was a convicted pedophile. And then he talks a lot about these subsequent, I'll call them prison interviews that he had with his dad, where his dad basically told him how he did it, how he tricked the parents.
Yep.
And Jimmy actually has not a website, a YouTube channel too. I believe if you just go to YouTube and type in Jimmy Hinton, it should bring it up. But he has so much good material on there where he goes into depth about how pedophiles get away with it, how they trick people. Mm-hmm. The other shameless plug I want to give is the situation I talked about that was kind of the last straw for me in the Church of Christ is when I received that phone call that there was a pedophile, a convicted pedophile. A man had abused his own daughter, spent time in prison, and had been released. That was kind of the last straw for us. I read his court file, complete court file. I was able to locate his daughter on social media. I just felt a strong need to talk to her. And we had a great conversation. She actually shared so much more information well beyond the actual court file. And during that conversation with her, I found out that she had a book that was getting ready to be published at that time. And that book is Redemption by Chelsea Freeman.
Yep.
And this book is her story about how she grew up. I don't think she mentions the Church of Christ, but that's who it was.
Yeah.
It was here in Central Ohio.
Mm-hmm.
And her dad was her abuser. And the book goes into detail about how her dad shared her with his friends. It's just it's an awful story. And at the same time, it's an amazing story of resilience on her part.
Yeah.
And so we're going to keep these conversations going. You know, our heart is to reach people that the church has damaged, whether it be in the way of sexual abuse or spiritual abuse. So that's kind of the direction we're going.
And we have an interview with her. So
yes, and I'll link that.
Yeah, we'll link that in there. So it's her, telling her story to us about kind of piggybacking with that book and giving some more info. And so, it's really neat to put a face to it, right? So you read the book and you hear the story and you feel the emotions of the story, but now you see the person who it happened to.
Yeah,
it really puts it together for you. And of course, I've met her outside the camera when she came, but it was.
Chelsea's story is amazing.
Yeah, and
survivor.
to go through it, to come back on the other side, and be as functional of a human being as she is, I think is amazing. And I would honestly put her and Jimmy in that same category. You know what I mean? Like, Jimmy is still preaching and still fighting for things as he is with what he went through, and she's still out there.
And I want to say, as a personal note, to the attorney who told me that I was gossiping and slandering this poor man who spent his time in prison, and I wasn't being forgiving. And I'm going to say to that man, because you know who you are, I want you to read her book. I want you to read Chelsea's book, and I want you to get back to me. So just as a quick recap, we are going to share a link in the description to buy both of these books. They're both awesome.
Yeah, I think so.
We're going to share a link to the interview with Chelsea Freeman.
Mm-hmm.
And we're also going to share a link to an interview that we did with Jimmy, where, so after his dad's conviction,
Mm-hmm.
he kind of went through his own deconstruction. He kind of got back on his feet, and he actually worked with the U.S. Marshals and sex trafficking organizations for a long time. And together with him and some other people, they came up with, I keep calling it a predator profiling tool.
I think he called it that too, didn't
he? Okay. I feel like there was another name he called it, but I'm going to call it a predator profiling tool. And it's really helpful within elementary schools and churches, but it can apply anywhere.
Yeah.
And the amount of information that is in that interview, it's a long interview. It's about 2 hours. But I want to say there's 12 or 15 different categories that we cover on how to identify behavior that somebody very likely has predatory type intentions towards kids. Really good information. And so, again, all of that information is going to be linked in the comments below. So if any of you guys have questions, any of that, we will leave our contact information too. But we hope you found this helpful, and we're just going to keep these conversations going.
That's the idea. Talk about it, talk about it, talk about it.
Yep.
Bye, y'all.